My name is Erin Grace. I am the Strategic Communications Manager for NCITE, which is a long way of saying I am your NCITE storyteller. And I have remarks prepared. They're right here, and I'll probably read from them in a minute. But it occurred to me as I was walking in about the first commandment of journalism during my 22 years at Nebraska's largest daily was to show, not tell. And nothing would get an editor more upset than a blown deadline or too long of a story. Long is bad, short is good. I always wrote too long. I'm going to tell you to be short. Was to when someone would tell you without showing you. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, I need to show them. And over the weekend, I was having drinks with friends from the paper, and we had just had a story in the paper about the new domestic terrorism policy that President Biden had unveiled. And we had two of our best spokespeople. We had our NCITE director, Gina Ligon, Pete Simi. They gave a really great press conference, and they broke down this policy wonderfully, and a really good writer at the paper did a nice story that ran on the front page. I thought it was home run in terms of telling our story. And this former colleague of mine who's really smart and used to be DC reporter had just said, I don't get it. I don't get what they're doing. And it was just this aha moment for me of where I'd kind of crossed over into the other world, and a reminder again about how important it is to translate our work so that, the retired editors of the world get it. This was not an average Joe. This was a above average intelligent person who fully didn't wrap her mind around this story. And so I said, well, read it again, then you'll get it. Now I said, it made me think about how I wanted to talk to you today about how you tell your story. So with that, let me get a little bit started. I want to ground us in purpose here. I'm coming to you as a longtime storyteller, both at the newspaper and then in my former job as an English teacher in a South Louisiana classroom through the National Service Corps program, AmeriCorps. I was a Teach for America teacher. And I found that whether you were talking to high school English students who are pretty reluctant learners, or whether you're talking to smart retired editors, or whether you're talking to your mom or anybody, it's really, really important to know who your audience is and know what your story is. And storytelling is easier for some than others. But I want to convince you about why it's important for you to do it. Your work is very relevant. These are very recent headlines, by the way, in a variety of different news outlets. Your work is incredibly impactful. What you are doing will ultimately save lives. This is incredibly compelling. This is not a hard story to try to tell. I mean, I spent my former career trying to turn paint into interesting stories sometimes. And so you have handed up to you this really compelling work you're doing. And frankly, your story serves a public good, right? One of the things that thrills me, not just as a former reporter, but maybe as a taxpayer, is that the work you're doing is transparent, right? We get to talk about it. That makes my job a lot easier than not talking about it. And we want to talk about it. We want to share it. Right now, the information field is very crowded. I mean, some of your research actually deals with that, right? You're looking for needles in haystacks of information. And so it is important in that haystack of information that we communicate and translate what it is you are doing and why it is that it matters. And I can say, well, it matters because what you do is a little bit of accountability, right? It's a return on investment for taxpayers, for our federal government who relies on your work so that they can do their jobs better, for your universities that are allowing you to spend your time on this, or, so that they can communicate why it's important to their audiences. It improves society. It's a public good. I mean, I could rattle off the reasons, and I have to say too, you're dealing with a scary subject that's been Hollywoodized, very polarized environment. And so you're the voice of reason here. You're scientists, you're researchers. What you say is objective, it's apolitical, and it grounds us in something that should hopefully make us all better. So hopefully I've now guilted you into why you need to tell your story. So let's go to what your story is. This is pretty basic. We could spend a lot of time talking about the first one, the problem. And in fact, we want you to focus during your breakout sessions on just that first bullet, the problem. There is so much to say about this, and how that editor responded to what I thought was a pretty clearly written story on a clearly written issue was not so clear to her. So we have to come into this with the humility that most average people do not understand this problem. The problem is complicated, it's scary, and so we need to tease it apart. And one angle is explaining this problem, explaining domestic terrorism, explaining targeted violence, and then explaining how it is we go about untangling the problem. What threads do we pull? How does this help? And this gets to the analysis and method. And this is the science for you scientists that I think is so important and so interesting. And again, it brings us back to center and it grounds us in the belief that objectivity, this is how we're saying what we're saying. And this is then why you should believe us, leads to credibility. I happen to think, I have a bias about what my favorite bullet is, but the tool is an incredibly important story, right? I mean, this isn't research in an ivory tower here. This is research that's going to help someone do their job better. And that's a great story to have to tell. And in a milieu that can be, again, dark and dangerous and mysterious and depressing, the tool is a sign of hope. Here is something that we can wrap our minds around. It's a concrete thing, whether it's knowledge or it's a tech tool, and I can understand how that is going to help society. So that is a great angle, and we want to tell more of those stories. Ultimately, I think people are the way in. I think whether you are trying to explain huge homeland security with all these different components where sometimes the one component doesn't know what the other component is going to do, or this big university system, or this complicated subject where people kind of tune out. What they do tune into are individuals. Time and time again, the numbers and the problem can kind of be too big for us. So when we go to people stories, like learning about NCITE board member Rick Legault, who did Navy service before going on to get a PhD in criminology. He read voraciously, he told me, while stationed in the Persian Gulf, and that shaped his path. Or you hear about Sue Yi, who just got her master's degree in IT innovation at UNO. And you know what Sue is? She's an aspiring writer. Of course, this appeals to me, but it shows the range of human capacity. So whatever we think an IT person might look or sound like or do, in fact, of course, there's incredible range there. I'll tell you in a minute about Kim Carter, who was one of the lead investigators for the Oklahoma City bombing, a local guy who pointed the federal people in the right direction with not a local person per se, but not who they were looking for, and how he later went on to lead the Department of Homeland Security in Oklahoma, so the state office of that department, and his personal story is so interesting. So I don't want you to ever discount your work or who you are or to take a back seat to that, because you do have a really interesting story that is important to share. So who do we share it with? Audience is super important, and who we're talking to will dictate the how we're going to say it. So first off, most important audience for us is Homeland Security. We need to, again, prove return on investment. We need to communicate what we're doing. An important part of our grant is communicating that so that we are showing engagement and promoting the transparency of this work. Homeland Security talks in a foreign language to me. I'm starting to learn it. It's all acronyms. Universities have their own set of acronyms. And we are all in our bubbles of expertise where we speak in our own language. I was telling students the other day, I was a beat reporter, and one said, what is that? And so even I am in a bubble. And so who we're speaking to determines how we talk. We will be promoting things a little bit differently to Homeland Security than we do to universities, than we do to local communities, than we do to the world. And what I like to have you wrap your mind around is the retired newspaper editors of the world is your audience. Your smart cousin is your main audience. They are not going to be able to speak your technical language, but they can follow along, and we just have to translate that to them. Okay, so how do we do this? It's really simple, right? First rule of thumb is using clear, concise, and plain language. And sometimes when I would get stuck writing a story, but there was that ticking clock, a deadline, I would literally type out a kindergarten sentence. This is about something. I needed to do that to focus my mind around what I was going to write about. There are so many things. This is especially true for academics, as I find as I'm starting to read literature. It is incredibly important to focus around the one thing. We have to slow walk this stuff for most of our audiences. The kinds of material I will be dealing with from you are not going to be for academic journals. And so I really urge you as much as possible to be concise, to be clear, and again, to speak like if you were at Thanksgiving dinner and you were telling your family what you were working on. Please think visually. A picture will attract readers way more than text. No matter how many Pulitzer Prize-worthy articles I ever wrote in my life, if it didn't have a photo attached to it, it wouldn't do as well. I could just track it online. Please include links if you were ever quoted or cited in something. I think Pete Simi gets the link award from me because he's always sending me a link. Please tag us, tag NCITE. That helps promote or enhance your work when you're promoting it online. And as you heard Dr. Liggins say, please identify as an NCITE researcher. I know that it can be a mouthful to have a lot of titles, and that when you're dealing with the media, they're not going to include all of them, but at least you can say you will have tried. But please do incorporate that. And there are ways to do it succinctly, where you can say, NCITE researcher Pete Simi, sociologist at Chapman University. I mean, that's just a way to quickly get at that. And then I want you to think in terms of what these stories are that you have to tell. So make a pitch and pitch it to me. I can be your relief pitcher. I can help you fine-tune the angle. Think of NewsPeg. Think of things that are coming up, like the domestic terrorism policy. When you know it's going to be released, think of how we can frame stories around that. It's really important to be first, and it's very important to be available. You may have lots of meetings going on, but if CNN calls, we want to be available for them. And then please share with me if you appear in a news outlet, however small. I would like to know that. We do report it up to DHS. Please also tell me if you have an item or an idea that you'd like to share. I will help you get that out. Twitter is an ecosystem where a lot of our audience lives, whether it's Homeland Security or fellow researchers. Some of you are very good at this, and I put Seamus Hughes as my star of the week because he's got about 60,000 followers. And Seamus has a lot of followers for a lot of reasons. What he has to say is worth it, and it's important. Twitter is a noise, and mostly it's a junk heap. But every so often you find jewels, and Seamus is a jewel. And one of the things he does in his tweets that I appreciate is that when he's tweeting out a public document that should be shared, he'll pull an interesting quote from it, and that is compelling, and it hooks me, and I get in every single time. The tweet below where the Lobby Shop podcast tagged him, you'll see that at Seamus Hughes there, lets Seamus know that he's been tagged, and look what he did. He quote tweeted it, so he enhances that. So that really helps your storytelling. I'm kind of whipping through this, but I want to address a few other outlets. Local news is extremely important. Mario Scalora is one of our researchers. He's based in Lincoln, right down the street from Omaha. He was quoted over the holidays after a shooting, and he appeared in the Lincoln Journal-Star. You know, I've seen a lot of surveys that show that as much as the people don't trust media, they do sort of trust their local news outlets. So please, when you're shooting for the New York Times, don't ever discount your hometown paper and how you might be able to speak to some issues that they care about. Of course, we don't want to forget national news either. One way we are trying to make a national name for ourselves is getting into an outlet, as we did recently. Gina and Seamus co-wrote an op-ed that appeared in The Hill talking about this new domestic terrorism strategy. So their timing was good. They knew it was coming. They had something prepared, and then The Hill ran with it. Now, I just told you people don't always trust national news sources, but national news sources build credibility. Below, you'll see a snippet from Rolling Stone. Pete Simi was cited as an expert in that story too. And these things have a way of avalanching. So if Simi's quoted in Rolling Stone, the New York Times may call him. He will be seen as an expert by other news outlets, and that will help grow. Finally is our newsletter. We do a quarterly publication in which we feature people, as you see here, right? There is Rick Legault, our board member, who works for S&T. There's Selena Green, a regional violence prevention coordinator. Kim Carter, the Oklahoma City investigator I told you about, is in the middle. Up top is the recently master's degreed Sue Yee, I hope writing her great American novel right now. And then below her is the late Kay Marish, who was one of the first women graduate students at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and has an incredible life story that is also rooted in public service and was an inspiration and a mentor to Dr. Liggin. And it was an honor to get to speak with Dr. Marish about her story. And so we want to demystify these scary, thorny subjects for people, and we can do that by telling your story. So please let me know about your students or your mentors or yourselves, and we'll try to work those in. Here are some basic channels we have. Of course, our Twitter account, our website we'll be tweaking and kind of redoing over the summer. Our next newsletter will be out in August, so send me ideas for that. And then, of course, we have our annual report that Dana mentioned that we have to give to DHS. This is actually a really important story with a very important deadline that's going to tell what we did this past year. We're going to grow on LinkedIn and in podcasting. And if you're a student watching, go to LinkedIn and search for NCITE students. There is an NCITE student group up and running, and that would be a great way for you to connect. Finally, I would love to take your questions. Please contact me. Please email me, call me. Victor Asal knows I accidentally dialed him one night. I have my phone on me. It's kind of sad but true. So you won't ever bother me. Please reach out with your questions or concerns.